This is Dale Wetzel. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. If you're out cruising around in Bismarck tonight, you might consider coming down. There's a few tables open, and you can have a nice drink and relax in a historically stimulating atmosphere, and they will feed you a good martini or whatever you want to drink, and also a nice meal. This restaurant was recently recognized as one of the top beef place in the country by the National Cattlemen's Association. It means that when they cook your steak, they really know what they're doing. So you can come down and you will not be disappointed. We have with us in the next hour, we're going to be talking about oil industry issues and North Dakota's oil-producing counties. This hour of the show is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, and we have with us this evening Mr. Lynn Helms, who is the director of the North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources. He is the top oil and gas regulator in the state of North Dakota. We also have with us Representative Vicki Steiner, who is a Republican from Dickinson. She is the director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. And we also have with us Mr. Brady Pelton, who is the deputy director of the association and one of our regulars on the show. It is baseball opening day. I think we should make a note of that, as well as April Fool's Day. I don't think these two things have anything to do with each other, but thought it was worth mentioning. Speaking of April Fool's Day, we have a number of bills in the legislature that we wanted to speak about that were decided or heard by either the House or Senate. If you're thinking about water skiing this summer, as it warms up, maybe your thoughts are turning to having your boat out on the water when it gets really warm outside. The water skiing law in North Dakota says that if you're towing a water skier, you need to have someone in your boat or on your jet ski facing in the opposite direction toward the person who's water skiing to make sure that person stays upright. There was a proposal in the Senate today to change that and allow folks who are boating to use a mirror only, a rear view mirror, to keep track of a water skier. That was rejected. So, in other words, if you're going to have a boat towing, if you're going to be driving a boat towing a water skier this summer, you're going to still need to have a spotter and not rely only on a mirror. We had hearings today about a couple of constitutional amendments. One of them is sponsored by Representative Al Carlson. He's the House Republican Majority Leader. He believes that any ballot initiative that is put on the ballot by a petition of interested voters, if it has a impact of $20 million or more over 2 years on the state budget, it should be on the general election ballot and not the subject of a special election or on the June primary ballot. That is a proposed constitutional amendment that's being considered by the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the committee had a hearing on that measure today. There is another amendment pending as well that's similar, although it's a bit more restrictive. It says that if a ballot measure is approved by the voters, something that is initiated by a petition submitted by a group of interested citizens, that if that impact of that initiative is more than $50 million over 2 years, and it is approved by the voters, then the legislature will review that, and if 60% of the legislators in the House or Senate agree, that particular ballot measure can be vetoed and essentially rejected by the legislature after it's approved by a statewide vote. And we'll see whether that amendment gets put on the ballot, and if so, what the reaction of North Dakotans is to that. In the meantime, again, we have with us Lynn Helms, the director of the North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources, and Representative Vicki Steiner, the Republican from Dickinson, who is the director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, and her deputy director, Mr. Brady Pelton. Welcome, everyone.
Nice to be here, Dale.
And Representative Mr. Helms, I almost called you Representative Helms. It seems like that you're around the Capitol so much, so you should be in the legislature in one form or another. I'm sure that folks in North Dakota are thinking, we've had so much oil activity in North Dakota over the past several years. How is this summer in terms of oil activity and how it impacts people's lives, especially in western North Dakota? How is this going to be different from last summer or previous summers?
Sure. Well, the way I like to describe it, Dale, is that I think we've reached our cruising altitude. We maxed out with 218 rigs at the end of May of 2012. We had 188 running this morning, and conversations with the oil industry indicate that we're going to be pretty close to 200 after the load restrictions go off around mid-year. That's assuming something crazy doesn't happen to oil prices to go higher or lower. And so this summer is still going to look like an extremely busy summer out there. We are still proving up a lot of leases, although probably 90% of the leases are proven now, so we're rapidly moving into the development phase, but we're not there yet. We have another year of drilling before we get there. So we've reached our cruising altitude. We've seen the number of cases coming before the commission stabilize at about 300 every month. We've seen the number of permit applications stabilize at about 200 every month, which is still in an incredibly high level. But it's really been steady there for about 4 months. So it's a little bit like driving 200 miles an hour instead of driving 220 miles an hour. It's noticeable, but we're still going very fast.
What do you see as the trends in the industry now as opposed to what they might have been 3 years ago?
Well, when we look out another year, past this summer, one of the biggest trends is going to be the reduction in the hauling of water. We've been looking a lot at how many individuals work or are associated with each drilling rig. And one of the amazing things when we broke all this down was that 25% of all of the labor that goes into keeping a drilling rig operating is the trucking of water to and from that well site to get that well drilled and hydraulically fractured. The pipeline systems are going in, big water storage systems are going in for both frack water and produced water. And we think we're going to see a significant reduction in that water hauling. That'll be great relief for the roads and for everything out there. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the difference between 900 truckloads of water moving in and out of an individual well, dropping by half to 450 truckloads moving in and out of a well. So the average well by next year going forward, instead of 2,000 semi-loads of material in and out of that well, we expect to see that down around 900.
That still seems like an awfully lot.
It still is a huge amount, Dale, and there is no way that you can get casing and cement and frac sand and rigs and all the materials that go into an oil well onto that site without semis. But the big change that we see coming is the movement of water, and that's going to make an enormous difference.
How is that being accomplished, the lessened truck traffic for water?
The main way that's being accomplished is the laying of pipelines. There are thousands and thousands of miles of plastic pipe going into the ground to move the water from water depots to pads or from pad to pad. And one of the emerging technologies that is pretty exciting to me is the salt-tolerant frac gels. So they've now developed a frac gel that allows them to blend half flowback water with half fresh water. And that will result in an enormous reduction in the amount of water movement. People keep pressing that. I don't expect that we're ever going to get to the place that Pennsylvania got to, where 80% of the water is recycled. But we don't want to settle for 50% either. So a big part of it is the pipelining of water, and the other big part is going to be the recycling of water.
Why does water need to be recycled in this context?
Well, I guess the big impetus there is that another new thing we've discovered is the maintenance water requirement of Bakken wells is very, very large. So we set out to build a water system that could supply 35 million gallons a day for hydraulically fracturing wells. As we grow the number of wells, we're finding that every one of those wells needs 400 to 600 gallons of fresh water a day to maintain its production. And so as that well number grows, we're going to use a larger volume of maintenance water than we ever dreamed that we would use for frack water. So we're going to have to become more efficient with the water if we're going to have enough and if we're not going to overtax our water resources.
And where's this water coming from mostly?
The water is mostly coming from the Missouri River. The groundwater sources out in western North Dakota are small, as we've all always known, and the Water Commission is really cautious about those, as they should be. So out of a 35 million gallon a day need, those groundwater sources are only capable of maybe a little over 7 million gallons a day. The vast majority needs to come from the Missouri River.
You mentioned a term that I'm not familiar with, a frack gel. What does that mean, and what is flowback water?
All right. Well, frack gel is the material that comes from the guar bean. It's guar gum, and it's chemically treated so that when you add it to water, you get something more like Jell-O than water. That allows the water to have the physical properties to be able to create fractures in the rock and carry sand into those fractures. So that's what we call frack gel. The early frack gels that we started this play with could only tolerate maybe 2,000 parts per million of sodium chloride. We're now seeing frack gels that can handle 50,000 parts per million, roughly 5 times as salty as seawater. And so real progress made there. We depend on Pakistan and East India for the world's supply of guar beans and guar gum. And so, once again, we find a world commodity and an interesting paradigm of things that we need to make our oil field work that have to come from halfway around the world.
The fact that this frack gel can handle more sodium chloride, what is the significance of that?
Well, the real significance is that we can now begin to recycle. When we were dealing with just fresh water, we had to have clean, fresh water from the Missouri River or from groundwater aquifers for every single frack job. Now we can take the very salty flowback water, and I'll answer that question in a minute, and blend it together with fresh water and recycle a good percentage of that flowback water. Now, when we inject water into the Bakken Formation to hydraulically fracture it, that water goes in pretty fresh, almost as fresh as the stuff in your bottle sitting on the table there. When it comes back out, it will have dissolved about 5 million pounds of salt. The rock in the Bakken and Three Forks is very heavy in salt, and so the water coming back out is 25 times as salty as seawater. And so we can blend that with some fresh water, get that salt content down to where the gels will tolerate it. And that leads me to the subject about flowback water. That's the water that flows back out of the well before the oil starts coming. We inject that water at extremely high pressure, some 7,000 to 9,000 pounds per square inch. It cracks the rock, puts the sand in there, and then we have to take the water back out so the oil can come. And when the water comes back, it has all that salt in it. It has a lot of oil-based drilling mud, a lot of clays and solid materials. In fact, the water coming back out is really half water and half solid material. It is very, very heavy and very contaminated.
Yeah. How is the pressure generated? You mentioned 7,000 to 9,000 pounds per square inch. How is that kind of pressure generated when you're pumping the water underground?
The industry generates that pressure with these enormous diesel-powered pumps. They bring about 20,000 horsepower onto a location. They're enormous V12 diesels. They run them 24 hours a day for up to 2 weeks as they pump that water into the ground. And so those pumps will pull the water out of the frac tanks at atmospheric pressure and take it up to 9,000 pounds per square inch, mix sand into it, and inject it into that wellbore.
How would you compare that pressure to like the water that comes out of a fire hose?
Well, fire hose is operating at somewhere around 40 pounds per square inch to 50 pounds per square inch. So in this case, we're talking about 150 times the pressure of water coming out of fire hose.
So it's not something you want to stand in front of.
You don't even want to get anywhere near in front of it. That's absolutely correct. It's a very destructive force, and we use water because it's incompressible. It's a very incompressible fluid. So you put a gallon in. A gallon at atmospheric pressure is the same volume as a gallon at 9,000 pounds per square inch. So it makes it a perfect medium to carry frac sand and to crack rock.
Representative Steiner, your organization is quite interested in reducing truck traffic on the roads. How is this trend toward water recycling helping that effort?
It's fantastic. And as you know, the legislature is trying to put some money towards that infrastructure, but it takes a while to build the roads. But I think it's great news that the oil industry is always working on ways to save time and money and save resources, and I really appreciate that that's come about. And it's, water is definitely a precious resource. We've had a lot of discussion on the floor of the House about water and who's selling it and who's heating it. And I think it's going to be really critical, too, for public safety to get some of those trucks off the road as soon as possible.
Now, one of the proposals in the legislature, it was defeated, was to tax water that is used for fracking and just used in the oil industry generally. Do you see that issue arising again in the future? And does the association have any collective view on whether or not it's a wise idea to tax water that's used by the oil industry?
I don't think the association has taken a specific stand or have been asked to even take a stand on that particular bill. I believe Representative Kaiser brought that bill. On the floor, I did vote for it because it is a resource that they're taking it out, and it's fresh water, and it's gone. In essence, although you can now recycle a little bit of it, but it's. They were going to take the money, if I remember the bill right. We do see a lot of bills during the day, but I think if I remember right, the bill said that the tax would be put in with the impact fund, if I'm thinking of the right bill, or it would have been used for infrastructure for the roads. It would have gone back to the county infrastructure fund to help with the roads. And part of the problem with these water depots, when someone is taking water out of the river and then they're building this facility, there are a tremendous number of trucks that come through and loop through, and those roads get rutted. There's a lot of dust for the farmers who live near that water depot, and yet there's no tax generation. So whether or not there was some resistance to, obviously, a new tax, but I thought it made sense. I don't know if it'll come back. I think in fairness, you can't put it all on the oil industry and say that the tax that the 11.5% tax that we charge, it has to carry the weight of that water extraction business, because that can actually be viewed as its own little industry in itself. But I thought it was worth exploring. We'll see if it comes back again. I'm not sure if it will. And Brady, I'm sure the board talked about it. Maybe you want to jump in with some comments about that.
Yes, Brady. What did the board discuss the efficacy of taxing water for oil industry use?
Actually, to be quite honest, that subject really never came to the table.
Do you think it will in the future?
I believe that if it does come back in another bill, it may very well come before the board.
One of the arguments that was heard during the debate on whether to tax water for oil industry uses, or specifically water that comes out of Lake Sakakawea, is that this is an argument that the Corps of Engineers is making, that water that's stored in the lake, that the Corps of Engineers should be able to essentially levy storage fees for this that the state or water users would pay. And there's been quite a lot of resistance to this idea amongst the governor, the attorney general, and the top state officials. And now we have the legislature saying, yeah, taxing water that's coming out of the lake is a fine idea. And it kind of buttresses the Corps of Engineers argument that there should be a storage fee or a tax on water in the lake. And I was wondering whether that factored in.
Actually, I don't see your correlation there, because we're not taxing them because the water was stored for them. We're taxing them because of the damage to the county road. And why should the rancher who lives across from the water depot suffer the dust and pay for the road to be fixed when in fact it was caused by the creation of a business that's right across from his ranch? Mm-hmm. So it has to do with tax distribution and fairness. I mean, if you get on the philosophical side of it, is who pays the bill. And I don't think the rancher's property taxes should go up to fix that road. And it isn't a storage fee. And the Corps of Engineers, I don't agree with their idea on the storage fee because of the sacrifice that we've made. And love to do a show about the Corps of Engineers, by the way, get the colonel on the phone. But anyway, I don't agree.
We can certainly do that.
Let's do it. I don't agree with that idea of the storage fee. But anyway, so that's kind of where I think it's at. I think the idea has some merit.
Mr. Helms, did you hear any reaction from the industry about this proposed water tax? What was it?
There was quite a bit of reaction from industry, and there was a lot of concern about adding a new tax. The industry feels like it pays a very large amount of tax, and that obviously a great deal of that tax should go back to build infrastructure in the western part of the state. But there was a concern just about how the tax would be levied and what it would be spent on, and whether it was appropriate to tax water. There certainly is an impact on the infrastructure when we put up these water depots or install this industry out there to supply water to the oil and gas industry. And so there needs to be a way to pay for that infrastructure and to make sure that those roads are maintained. Water typically is a renewable resource, but in this case we're talking about something different. We're taking the water out of the water cycle and putting enough salt into it that 80% of it ends up being disposed of permanently into underground formations. And so it disappears from the water cycle permanently.
We've been speaking to Lynn Helms, who's the director of the Department of Mineral Resources in North Dakota. He's the chief oil regulator in the state of North Dakota. We also have with us Representative Vicki Steiner. She's a Republican from Dickinson and director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. We'll be back in a moment to continue our discussion about North Dakota's oil industry and its impacts on western North Dakota.
The Legislature today is brought to you.
Alley. Let me tell you, we're speaking tonight with Lynn Helms, who is the director of the Department of Mineral Resources in North Dakota. He's the top oil regulator in the state of North Dakota. We also have with us Representative Vicki Steiner. She's a Republican from Dickinson and the director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. We also have with us Brady Pelton, the deputy director of the association, who has just appeared with a large glass of clear liquid. I'll assume it's water.
It is liquid, and it is water.
It is liquid, yes.
Thank you for pointing that out, though.
I thought maybe the show was getting too much for you, and you've gone and gotten a big, stiff drink of gin or vodka or something. This, by the way, this hour of our show is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, and they are one of the sponsors that support this show, and without them we wouldn't have it, and so we're quite grateful to them for their sponsorship. Mr. Helms, one of the issues that's often raised about exploration in the Bakken is that it's costly to drill wells, and I was wondering what has been going on lately in western North Dakota to try to reduce those costs and make the wells more profitable.
Well, the operators began working on this very, very hard about the third quarter of last year. As I stated, into May last year we hit 218 drilling rigs, and everything was going essentially straight up, including well costs. We had seen well costs rise from about $6.5 million per well, and of course that wasn't multi-stage fracturing technology, to $13 million. So we saw wells double in price from 2009 through 2012. So they put the brakes on in the third quarter, and we saw the rig count drop to 179 and then settle in those low 180s, and it really had the desired effect. Operators' well costs have come down now to right in the $9 million per well range. They're very, very comfortable in that range, and still trying to eke out, maybe a little bit more efficiency and push that a little bit lower. But they brought those costs down from $13 million to $9 million, and so that makes it possible. That's another reason I say, we've really reached our cruising altitude, and we, if oil prices remain reasonably stable, and I'm talking about above $60 a barrel and below $100 a barrel, we can cruise at this rig count and with these economics for 20 years. And even though the exploration for where the boundaries of the Bakken are, that's pretty well over. I think they've pretty well defined the eastern and southern edge of this particular play. The exploration for how thick it is goes on. And so we've only seen our first and second, third bench wells, nothing in the fourth bench yet. And so there will be a great deal of exploration over the next couple of years to figure out just how thick that Three Forks zone is and how much oil we have down there. But it's a very large resource.
This $9 million that you mentioned is the typical cost of a well. What is that spent on? What does that buy?
About $6 million of it buys 22 days of a drilling rig, the cement and the casing. It takes 7 miles of steel pipe to finish one of these wells because we require 5 layers of protection if you're going to hydraulically fracture a well. Three layers of steel and 2 layers of concrete. And so it takes 7 miles of steel pipe. By the time we're all done, we'll have put enough steel pipe under North Dakota's soil to reach past the moon. So it is a tremendous amount of material goes into one of these wells. It's about $6 million to drill and get the pipe in the hole. And then another $3 million to hydraulically fracture, to move the water there, buy the horsepower, buy the sand, and pump all that away. The economics are great. The average Bakken well will pay out in about 12 months the first time, and in about 24 months the second time, and on it goes. So the return on investment is great as well.
Representative Steiner, one of the things that I know is of concern to the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties is the population influx that is coming into western North Dakota in response to the boom in the oil industry and the jobs that are available. Folks are coming to find work. I understand that there's been some work done in terms of trying to project how many folks are coming and to plan for how we're going to deal with them, how we're going to house them and provide them with services.
That's true. It's kind of an outgrowth of Vision West ND, as I know you've had that issue before you on another show. And Don Mackey was going to be on this evening and was unable to, but he's the director for Center for Rural Entrepreneurship, and they received a Bush grant and are working through Dickinson State University to look at short-term and long-term issues resulting from rapid growth. And I'll talk about 2 of them, but the first one that really had an impact with legislators was that Headwaters study that showed how other states received quite a bit more tax revenue, up to 25 to 35% of the tax revenue would return to the local governments, and in North Dakota it's about 7%. And so that has had a huge impact on the creation of House Bill 1358, which I know you've discussed with Representative Scarpel before. But beyond that study, they've also got 7 other webinars on the Vision West ND site dealing with Pennsylvania, what's happening with the Marcellus Shale, what's happening in other parts of the country. If people want to see and learn from those booms, they can go on that website and learn about them.
And they Google Vision West?
Vision West ND. Mm-hmm. Yep, visionwestnd.com.
Okay.
And then also off that push with Bush, the Bush Foundation was population, and that's how we brought in Mr. Helms to help us with. We know that these jobs are coming, and we're expecting approximately 200,000 some people, possibly over time. And 2020, I believe, is what we're working towards. And I have to say, I said this during the break, I'm really surprised there are people in leadership positions in the state who still are not sure that this is actually going to happen. And so if you live out west, you can see it's obviously happening. But if you don't live it, let's say you live somewhere else and you never experience it, it's hard to believe that, because when you've lived in North Dakota all your life, we've always been told that people want to leave and that we always need to do things to attract them to come. It's hard to believe that they're all coming without us trying to attract them. I mean, it's a mindset, I think. So there's a whole idea of the population, and Mr. Helms can kind of go through how he went through this new population that's coming, and they also did webinars on that to teach the local counties about how much of that population do you want to attract. And Lynn, maybe you can talk about those numbers and what's going to happen with that.
Sure. We partnered up with Vision West because we had developed a model for how many industry jobs there were going to be county by county across the 19 producing counties out there. And we needed a way to roll that out to the local planning individuals and the local county commissioners and city commissioners that need that information. So we partnered with Vision West. We decided to do this at the Department of Mineral Resources the end of 2011 because all of the curves were going straight up. The rig curve was going straight up. The production curve was going straight up. The jobs, everything, and how do you then make reasonable projections about what to build and what to do when statistics fail you? You can't put a straight line through any of those curves and come up with anything reasonable or realistic. So we decided to try something completely outside the box, something nobody else had done. We went back to the geology, and we laid out, I got with my geologists, and we figured out how many square miles of mature Bakken there were in each county, and some estimate of how thick the Bakken and Three Forks were. That led us to how many wells there would be drilled ultimately over the full development of the Bakken and Three Forks in each county. And then that led us to we could back into rig counts from that because it was going to take a certain number of rigs to prove up the leases, and then there would be some drop because of going into the development and efficiency phase, and how many rigs it would take to finally drill the whole thing out over about a 20-year time period. We knew from experience that a drilling rig employs 120 people directly in the industry, so we could add those jobs in. We knew how many people it took to hydraulically fracture a well and to move those materials to the well, so we could add those in. We knew how many people it takes to build a natural gas plant and those pipelines, and added those in. And we know how many people and the various jobs it takes to keep a well producing. So we put all of that into the model and generated these county-by-county model numbers and then provided them to Vision West, who then helped us put together a webinar to talk to individual counties and cities about what that meant for their community. One of the big surprises was that traditionally in North Dakota, one of these oil field jobs has attracted 2.5 secondary jobs. We're talking about the nurses and ambulance drivers and grocery store workers and all that. So traditionally in North Dakota, we'd bring in 2.5 people for every oil field worker. Did a quick study of what was happening in 2012, and we had crowded the housing situation in western North Dakota, had crowded people out so badly that we were at a 0.7 multiplier. We were at less than a third of normal because there was no place for them to live. There wasn't enough room on the roads or apartments or any of that, and that's why you saw the explosion of crew camps. So there's a huge amount of work to do just to get back to the 2.5 multiplier for the 40,000 workers we've already brought to the state. And we're only partway there. The projections, the model shows that we don't peak in oil field employment till 2020 at about 65,000 workers, which if we can get back to the 2.5 multiplier, that's a total of 250,000 new jobs in the North Dakota economy that weren't there in 2005 when this all started. So again, it's an ongoing process because some things are changing. We're going to reduce the number of water haulers per rig, so there'll be some decline there. We're actually finding out it takes more people to operate a Bakken well than it did historical vertical wells. and all of that. But it's a fantastic tool. We have now shared it with Kansas, who's going through a boom on the Kansas-Oklahoma border, with Ohio, who's going through a boom in the western end of the Marcellus, and so it's spreading across the country as a way to model and figure out what your population is going to look like.
You mentioned a 2.5% multiplier, or 2.5 multiplier.
2.5 multiplier.
What is that? I mean, given the fact that your multiplier is a lot smaller, I mean, is that even a valid number anymore?
Well, we think it's a valid target, and you're right. I mean, we have done something to North Dakota that's never been done before since the Homestead days. So is that a valid number? It's a valid target. One of the things I did is I went and explored some much more mature oil and gas producing areas, the Denver-Aurora area, where they've had the DJ Basin on production for a long time. And they not only developed the normal multiplier, but they went ahead and moved into petrochemical manufacturing and petrochemical marketing in the Denver area. Their multiplier is 3.5. So, yes, I believe it's valid. I think it's even probably low if we're willing to dream big and think about North Dakota not just as a commodity producing area, but as a place that refines the oil, refines the natural gas, and then let's bring in a plastics manufacturing, a petrochemical industry, and let's push that multiplier not to 2.5, but 3.5.
Representative Steiner, has the Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties done anything to try to encourage the development of businesses such as Mr. Helms mentioned, refineries, plastics manufacturers, anything of that nature?
No, we haven't been involved with the economic development end on that end. Basically, our focus so far has been to see how we can get the 5% gross production tax distribution back to take care of infrastructure. And it's possible in the future they may branch into that. I do hope that we see some of those industries like ceramic proppants.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Lynn Helms' staff has been working to see if they can bake our clay at Hebron and make that into ceramic proppant. I don't know what the study showed. I haven't heard, but I know they tested it somewhere, and maybe you can enlighten us as to what happened.
Yes. Well, we're just getting the results back from NDSU on the lab tests of the clay in the Hebron to Marmarth area, and they look very promising. There's also been a shipment of that clay taken to Georgia to be test fired, and that hasn't happened yet, but that's going to happen, in the next few months.
And what's the objective here?
Well, the objective is we're consuming, or the oil industry in western North Dakota is consuming about 2 million tons a year of ceramic proppant. It's all imported from China at a cost of about $1 billion a year. We have
just explain briefly what proppant is.
Oh, proppant is the material that you pump in with the frac water to hold the fractures open. It stays in the formation and holds those little cracks open so the oil can flow through them. Most early wells used sand that was imported from Wisconsin and Minnesota, and you've heard about the controversy over there. But as we've learned more and more about the reservoir, there's been more and more of a shift to these high-strength materials. They're tiny ceramic beads that are man-made from clay materials. And it dawned on us that we had abundant clay materials in western North Dakota, and that we should be exploring this. And we found out that we've got quite a bit of clay out there that has the right chemistry for manufacturing these man-made proppant materials. So we could potentially tap into $1 billion a year industry with maybe as many as 300 additional secondary jobs coming into the state.
So what needs to be done in order to determine whether the North Dakota clay can be used as a proppant?
Well, all of that's being done. The lab tests, like I said, the final lab tests should be coming in soon from NDSU, so we'll have a publication on that in terms of what the clay is like across that whole region. And then it needs to be test fired and lab tested and field tested, and that should happen over the next year or so. that testing of actual North Dakota clay to see if we can make proppant out of it. But there are just so many secondary industries that come off a resource play like this.
Does North Dakota presently have a facility, like, for example, can the Hebron brick manufacturer make proppant?
We visited with them, and they weren't interested in doing it, but absolutely. They've got a mining permit. They've got access to the materials, and with not too much change in technology, they would have the ability to manufacture man-made proppant. You need clay, water, natural gas, and an extruder and some ovens. And about the only thing that they lack is the extruder and the kiln for firing it. So it's an exciting opportunity, but the Association of Counties right now is focused on the infrastructure needs, the water needs, the road needs, the housing needs, to get back to that 2.5 multiplier, which we just really feel very strongly that we need to do. We are so oil industry heavy that you're looking at towns like Williston, where 53% of the workforce is direct oil and gas employment. That needs to be diversified. That can only happen if we get back to that 2.5 multiplier, and that can only happen if we build affordable housing, if we rebuild the roads, and if we build the water and sewer systems to support that population out there.
Representative Steiner, obviously you've been focused on what the legislature is doing in terms of bringing oil tax money that the state is presently collecting back to the oil and gas producing counties that are responsible for it. Can you tell us what the status is of how that's going in terms of how much money you're expecting to get back from the state, and how much of an increase this would be in terms of what you're getting now?
Well, let's see, where do I start? House Bill 1358 is now over on the Senate side, and the House passed it out. I believe it's a little over $1 billion, but there's non-oil county money in that as well. It's a comprehensive package, so I think the estimate is about $800 million, if I remember right, directly to the West in different forms, different parts of the bill. But I wanted to mention, too, when we talk about population, it's really important that we have this infrastructure in place, because the pumpers, the oil companies like to see the pumper who goes out to check the wells in production. They like to have them about 30 minutes from their route.
That's right.
Because they'll check several oil wells a day to make sure they're running and that the oil is pumping. And that's why they call him the pumper. And, in fact, my brother-in-law has a job now as a pumper. And my other brother-in-law is also looking at that. But we can't have them living in Fargo, for example. Some of the jobs can be in Fargo, some can be in Bismarck, but the pumpers themselves have to be within about 30 minutes away or 30 miles away. So, right now, because of what's happening out west, we are really concerned about getting everything organized for all these new people who are coming and making a home for this new industry. So that's taking most of our time. The bill is in the Senate, and I think, Brady, you were sitting in on the meeting this morning in Senate Finance and Tax. I don't know if you...
And the Senate Finance and Tax Committee plans on working on it tomorrow and Wednesday, and passing it out of committee on Wednesday, referring it over to appropriations so that the money guys can work on it on Friday.
Senator Heitkamp was in North Dakota last week, and she spoke to the House and Senate and made a speech to both chambers. And one of the things she said was, if we don't have housing, when the folks that are working in the industry who are living in crew camps and trailers and whatnot, when the economy improves, the national economy, when the economy in their home states improves, they're going to go home instead of staying here if they don't have a place to live. How urgent a situation is this?
I think it has to be a really big concern for the industry. We've been very fortunate to have all these people come here at much, it must be very stressful for them to leave their families behind. Most of the guys that I've talked to in the airports are here in North Dakota for 2 weeks, and then they go home for a week. Whether or not they're going to continue that, into the next few years, I don't know. But as that economy improves, they might decide to stay home. So I think it's really important for our state and for the development of the play to make sure that we provide that housing. And you're right, I went to a housing conference with Senator Heitkamp, And we talked about some of the regulations, and part of it is also federal, not just state. The state is putting some dollars towards affordable housing, but the feds need to change some of their income guidelines for HUD, for the HUD program, and we discussed that at her meeting.
Yes. I mean, it's to the extent we found out from one of our big natural gas gatherers that oil or condensate collects in these gas pipes in the wintertime. They're flying pigging crews in from Texas on a 2-week rotation basis because there aren't enough people living in North Dakota to pump these rubber pigs through the pipelines to clean the condensate out. So, I mean, they want to live here, a lot of them, they want to move here, but we've got to build the infrastructure to allow that.
So what is your, Representative Steiner, what's your assessment of the legislative session as far as how it's addressed what needs to be done in terms of Western North Dakota?
Well, we're not done yet, obviously. We've got a few more weeks yet. There are a few things I'd like to see. I want to make sure that that the counties, cities, and schools have the resources they need, and I think we've made some good steps. I think it's going well.
The woman you're listening to is Representative Vicki Steiner. She's a Republican from Dickinson. She is also the director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, which is the sponsor of this hour of the legislature today. We've also been speaking to Brady Pelton, the deputy director of the association, and Mr. Lynn Helms, who is the director of the North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources and the top oil regulator in the state of North Dakota. Thank you all for being with us this evening.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And we will be back with you tomorrow night. We'll be bringing up other subjects of interest in the North Dakota legislature, and I hope you'll be listening. Thank you.